The morning had started like any other on the McAllister ranch. The autumn air carried the familiar scent of earth and hay as I walked the eastern fence line, checking for repairs needed before winter. This land had been in my family for 4 generations ever since my great-grandfather Thomas bought it in 1903, with money saved from 15 years working the railroads. I paused at the old oak tree that marked the northern boundary, running my hand over the rough bark where my grandfather had carved his initials nearly 80 years ago. The tree had witnessed more history than any building in the county. So had this land. My childhood memories lived in every corner of these 120 acres. Learning to ride in the south pasture, swimming in the creek during scorching summer days, helping my father mend fences and birth calves. When my parents passed 5 years ago, leaving the ranch to me, I had promised to protect this legacy. The surrounding area had changed dramatically over the decades. What was once miles of farmland was now increasingly dotted with housing developments as the nearby city expanded outward. But our ranch remained untouched, a living museum of regional history. I returned to the house, the original structure built in 1903, expanded in the 1940s, and found an official-looking envelope in the mailbox. The return address showed Lakeside Valley Estates Homeowners Association. I frowned. The nearest development was still half a mile away. Why would they be sending me mail? Inside the kitchen, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter within. The words seemed to rearrange themselves before my eyes, refusing to make sense. According to this document, my property had been legally incorporated into the Lakeside Valley Estates development. They were generously offering me 30 days to vacate before legal proceedings would begin. My hands began to shake. This had to be a mistake, some administrative error. I reached for the phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. After navigating an automated system, a person with a clipped, efficient voice answered, "Lakeside Valley HOA. This is Billy Hill speaking. How may I direct your call? My name is James McAllister. I own McAllister Ranch on County Road 22. I just received a letter claiming my property belongs to your development. There has been a serious mistake." The line went quiet for a moment. "One moment, please." Classical music played briefly before a different voice came on the line. "Mr. McAllister, Robert Harrington, president of the Lakeside Valley HOA. I was expecting your call. Mr. Harrington, there has been a mistake. My family has owned this ranch for 120 years. It is not part of any development." "No mistake, Mr. McAllister?" His voice carried absolute certainty. "Your property was legally incorporated into our development through proper channels 3 months ago. The paperwork is filed with the county. I understand this might come as a shock, but I assure you everything is in order." "That is impossible," I replied, my voice rising. "I never sold this land. I never signed anything. Previous ownership is irrelevant. Now, the documentation is clear. We own the land and are prepared to begin development. The 30-day grace period is a courtesy, not a legal requirement." The conversation continued in this surreal manner, with Harrington speaking as if the theft of my family legacy was a simple business transaction already completed. When I hung up the phone, a cold dread had settled in my stomach. This was not a misunderstanding. This was calculated, deliberate. From my window, I could see the men in suits still walking my property. One was now taking photographs of the old barn. Looking at the letter again, I noticed Robert Harrington's signature at the bottom. Square, confident strokes. The signature of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. I realized I was facing something far more dangerous than a paperwork error. This was the beginning of a fight for everything that mattered to me. The county records office smelled of dust and aging paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals. I had arrived the moment they opened, desperate for answers about how my land could possibly have been claimed by an HOA without my knowledge. "I need to see all recent filings related to this property," I told the clerk, sliding over a paper with my address and parcel number. The young person nodded and began typing into her computer, her brow furrowed as she studied the screen. "That is strange," she muttered, clicking through several screens. "According to this, Your property was incorporated into the Lakeside Valley subdivision through an amendment filed 3 months ago, but that should require owner authorization. I never authorized anything, I said, leaning forward. Can I see the paperwork? But minutes later, I was staring at documents that made my blood run cold. There appeared to be a deed transfer with what looked like my signature, except I had never signed it. The document claimed I had sold the entire property to Lakeside Development LLC, which had then incorporated it into their HOA. This signature is forged, I said, looking up from the papers. I never signed this. The clerk, whose nameplate read Susan, glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. You are not the first person to come in with concerns about Lakeside filings. There have been questions about several properties on the eastern edge of the county. Susan slid another folder toward me. These were filed last year. 3 historic properties were incorporated into their development. All 3 owners contested the signatures. What happened to them? I asked. They all ended up settling, took buyouts after facing mounting legal pressure. She looked genuinely concerned. Mr. Harrington and his associates are very thorough. They file everything properly, make everything look legitimate. Fighting them is difficult. I spent the next several hours researching Robert Harrington and Lakeside Valley Estates. The development company had appeared in the county 5 years ago and quickly acquired large tracts of land. Their developments featured luxury homes with strict HOA regulations and high fees. More concerning were the 3 lawsuits filed against them that had mysteriously been withdrawn before reaching court. By afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Alan Dawson, a property attorney whose name Susan had discreetly written on a notepad. His office walls were lined with law books, and his expression grew increasingly grave as I explained my situation. Let me be frank, Mr. McAllister, he said after examining my documents. You are dealing with sophisticated operators. On paper, everything they have done appears legal. That forged signature will be difficult to prove as forgery without an expensive expert witness. But they cannot just steal my land, I protested. Of course not. But proving the theft will be costly and time-consuming. The courts move slowly. Meanwhile, they will use that time to build pressure on you. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Your land is extremely valuable. That is what this is really about. Valuable? It is just an old ranch. Alan pulled out a map of the county and pointed to my property. Your ranch sits between their current development and the lake. They need your land to create waterfront properties which sell for triple the price of inland lots. Your ranch is not just land to them. It is potentially $50 million in premium real estate. As I drove home, the reality of what I was facing began to sink in. This was not a misunderstanding, but a calculated land grab disguised as legitimate business. When I turned into my driveway, I found 3 black SUVs parked in front of my house. Men in expensive suits stood on my porch. The tallest one, whom I recognized from his voice as Robert Harrington, stepped forward as I approached. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. Mr. McAllister, I thought it was time we met in person. The others remained silent as Harrington handed me a thick envelope. Inside, you will find formal notice of your obligation to vacate within 30 days, along with a generous relocation offer. $300,000, more than fair for a property this outdated. I stared at him, taking in his manicured appearance and cold eyes. This ranch has been in my family for over a century. Progress waits for no one, Mr. McAllister. Lakeside Valley represents the future of this county. You can either profit from that progress or become an obstacle to it. I strongly suggest the former. His tone remained pleasant, but the threat was unmistakable. As they drove away, their tires kicking up dust on my driveway, I knew I was in the fight of my life against an enemy who had likely never lost. The next morning, I drove to my nearest neighbor, the Wilsons. Their farm had bordered ours for 3 generations, and Tom Wilson and I had grown up together. If anyone would understand the situation and offer support, it would be Tom. I pulled into their driveway and immediately noticed something different. Construction stakes marked the edge of their property, and a sold sign stood near their mailbox. Confused, I knocked on their door. Tom answered, but his usual warm smile was replaced with an uncomfortable expression. "James," he greeted me, not quite meeting my eyes. "What brings you over? Have you heard about what Lakeside Valley is trying to do? They are claiming they own my ranch." I studied his face, noticing his discomfort. "Tom, what is going on?" He hesitated before inviting me inside. At the kitchen table, he finally explained, "We sold our place to them. James, got a great offer, 3 times market value. They are building the eastern section of the development. Here." I felt as though I had been punched. "You sold to the people trying to steal my land?" "They said you had already agreed to sell," Tom replied defensively. "Showed us plans with your property already marked for development, said you were just finalizing the details." The betrayal stung, but I realized Tom had been manipulated as well. Over the next few days, I visited other neighbors only to discover similar situations. Some had sold willingly for impressive sums. Others believed I had already agreed to sell. The community was rapidly dividing between those benefiting from the development and those concerned about preserving the area's rural character. A town hall meeting was scheduled to discuss the expansion of Lakeside Valley Estates. I arrived early to find the community center already packed. Many faces turned toward me as I entered, some sympathetic, others openly hostile. I took a seat, near the back, feeling suddenly like a stranger in the town where I had lived my entire life. Robert Harrington commanded the room from the moment he approached the podium. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he presented architectural renderings of stunning waterfront homes, a golf course, and retail spaces. "Lakeside Valley Estates represents a 21st century vision for our community," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Property values will increase by an estimated 40% across the region. Tax revenue will triple, allowing for improved schools and infrastructure." Digital displays showed before and after images of rural properties transformed into manicured estates. When he presented an image of my ranch reimagined as luxury homes surrounding a marina, I felt physically ill. "The final phase includes waterfront properties where the old McAllister property currently sits," Harrington continued. "These premium homes will attract business executives and professionals to our community, bringing their expertise and investment dollars with them." When the floor opened for comments, I approached the microphone. My hands trembled slightly as I addressed my neighbors. "My family has worked that land for 120 years, I began. The ranch is not just my home. It is part of our community's history. There are barns on my property built by hand before electricity came to this county. Native American artifacts have been found along the creek. This history cannot be replaced with luxury homes." Before I could continue, Harrington smoothly interrupted. "While we appreciate nostalgia, we must recognize that one person's sentimentality should not hold back progress that benefits everyone. Mr. McAllister has been offered fair compensation." Murmurs of agreement rippled through much of the crowd. I tried to explain about the forged documents, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. People were entranced by visions of rising property values and community improvements. As the meeting concluded, I stood alone near the exit, watching as neighbors who had known me all my life avoided eye contact. Harrington worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and slapping backs. I had never felt so isolated in my hometown. As I turned to leave, an elderly Billy Hill approached me. "Mr. McAllister, I am Maria Connors from the Historical Society. We should talk." Behind her stood a small group of concerned-looking residents. "Some of us are not convinced this development is as perfect as they claim." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I might be outmaneuvered and outspent, but I was not entirely alone. The formal eviction notice arrived exactly 30 days after the first letter. The sheriff delivered it personally, looking uncomfortable as he handed over the official document. "I am sorry about this, James," he said quietly. "My hands are tied. The paperwork appears to be in order." I thanked him for his concern and closed the door, then sank into my kitchen chair to read the notice. I had 10 days to vacate or face legal removal. The next morning, I met again with Alan Dawson, who had agreed to represent me despite his initial pessimism about the case. They are moving faster than I expected, he admitted, reviewing the eviction notice. We need to file for an emergency injunction to prevent them from taking possession while we contest the original deed transfer. The legal battle quickly became all-consuming. Each day brought new paperwork, court filings, and mounting expenses. I liquidated my savings account to pay Alan's retainer. When that ran out, I sold my truck and some farm equipment. The ranch operations suffered as I devoted all my time to the legal fight. Nights became an endless cycle of anxiety and research. I would sit at my kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by legal documents I barely understood, searching for anything that might help our case. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. We have found a potential issue with their filing, Alan told me during our third week of legal proceedings. The parcel description in their amended plat contains a technical error in the survey coordinates. It is small, but it might give us grounds to challenge the entire filing. This small victory gave us hope, but Harrington and his team responded with overwhelming legal force. They filed motions to dismiss our challenges, submitted hundreds of pages of supporting documentation, and requested expedited hearings. Their strategy was clear: overwhelm us with paperwork and drain my limited resources. As the legal battle intensified, so did the pressure tactics. Code enforcement officers suddenly appeared, citing me for violations that had never been issues before. Peeling paint on the north barn, unmowed areas near the road, improper equipment storage. Each citation came with a fine I could not afford to pay. Anonymous complaints led to visits from animal welfare checking on my horses and cattle. The power mysteriously went out for 3 days, causing me to lose a freezer full of food. My mailbox was vandalized twice. While none of these incidents could be directly traced to Lakeside Valley, the timing was impossible to ignore. The stress began to take a physical toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself jumping at unexpected sounds. The ranch, once my sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield where I was constantly under siege. Weeks into the legal fight, I received another offer from Lakeside Valley. This one for $500,000, a significant increase from their first offer, though still far below the land's actual value. Alan advised me to consider it. "James, I have to be honest with you," he said during a late meeting at his office. "Their legal resources are virtually unlimited. They have 3 attorneys working this case full-time. We have found some issues with their filings, but they keep countering with procedural motions that delay our progress while accelerating the eviction process." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you telling me to give up? To let them steal my family's legacy?" "I am telling you to be realistic about what you are facing," he replied gently. "Even if we eventually win, the fight could take years and hundreds of thousands in legal fees. They know this. It is why their strategy works." That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset cast long shadows across fields my ancestors had worked. The buyout offer sat on the table beside me. $500,000 was enough to start over somewhere else, not in this county, but perhaps in a different state where land was cheaper. For the first time, I seriously considered accepting defeat. I was exhausted, financially drained, and increasingly isolated as more neighbors sided with the development. Perhaps progress truly was inevitable, and I was foolish to stand against it. I picked up the offer letter, reading through the legal language that would end my family's connection to this land forever. My hand hovered over the signature line. One signature and the fight would be over. The pressure would end. I could sleep again. A photo on the wall caught my eye. My great-grandfather standing proudly in front of the newly built ranch house in 1903. His expression reflected the determination of a man who had worked his entire life to create something lasting, something he believed would matter for generations to come. I set down the pen without signing. Whatever happened, I could not be the one to surrender what 4 generations had built. There had to be another way forward, something I was missing. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Maria Connors from the Historical Society. "Mr. McAllister, I found something in our archives you need to see. It concerns the original land grant for your property. It might change everything." Her words rekindled the ember of hope I had nearly extinguished. I agreed to meet her the following morning at the Historical Society. As I hung up the phone, I tore the buyout offer in half. The fight was not over yet. The Historical Society occupied a modest building near the county courthouse. Inside, the air smelled of old books and furniture polish. Maria Connors, a retired librarian with silver hair and alert eyes, greeted me with unexpected enthusiasm. "I have been researching your property since the town meeting," she explained, leading me to a back room filled with documents. Something about Mr. Harrington's claims did not sit right with me. She gestured to a table where several document boxes waited. These contain records related to original land grants in the county. I thought we might find something useful about your property's history. We spent hours sifting through fragile papers and faded maps. By mid-afternoon, my eyes burned from strain, but we had discovered nothing that would help legally challenge Lakeside Valley's claims. "Perhaps we should take a break," Maria suggested kindly. "You mentioned you have some old family documents at home. Sometimes families preserve records that never make it into official archives." That evening, I climbed into the ranch house attic with a flashlight. Dust particles danced in the beam as I made my way to a corner where generations of family papers were stored in old trunks. Most were familiar: photographs, letters, my grandfather's military records. Then I noticed a leather document case I had never fully examined, tucked beneath other papers. Inside was a yellow document with an official government seal. The elegant script was faded but still legible. An original land grant from 1903 transferring the property from the United States government to my great-grandfather, Thomas McAllister. What caught my attention was a specific clause I had never known existed. This land grant includes special protected status as a historically significant homestead site pursuant to the Historic Settlement Preservation Act of 1901. Any transfer of ownership must maintain the historical character of the property and requires federal review prior to substantial alteration. My hands trembled as I read the words. This was not just a deed, but a special designation that might protect the ranch from development. I carefully photographed the document and immediately called Maria. The next morning, Maria connected me with Professor James Wilson at the State University, an expert in historical land designations. After examining the document, he confirmed its authenticity and significance. "This is extraordinary," he explained over video call. "The Historic Settlement Preservation Act was short-lived, only in effect from 1901 to 1906. But land designations made during that period remain legally binding. According to this, your property cannot be developed without federal review and approval." This discovery led us to dig deeper. At the state archives, we uncovered another critical document, an 1875 treaty with indigenous peoples that designated the creek running through my property as protected ancestral land. This treaty had never been superseded and provided additional protection against development. Armed with these findings, we expanded our search to neighboring properties. A pattern began to emerge: suspicious transfers of historically significant properties, all involving Lakeside Valley estates. I contacted Elena Rivera, an investigative journalist whose articles on development controversies I had read in the regional newspaper. Initially skeptical, she became increasingly interested as I shared our discoveries. "If what you are saying is true," she said during our first meeting, "this is not just about your property. This could be systematic fraud targeting historic properties throughout the county." Elena began her own investigation using journalistic resources unavailable to us. Within a week, she had uncovered damning evidence. Lakeside Valley had manipulated property records for at least 7 historic properties in the county. In each case, they had exploited technicalities or used questionable documentation to override historical protections. Most significantly, Elena discovered that Robert Harrington had previously faced similar accusations in 2 other states, operating under different company names. In both cases, charges were dropped after private settlements with landowners. The most damning evidence came when Elena obtained copies of the original documents Lakeside had filed regarding my property. Expert analysis confirmed what I had insisted all along: the signature on the deed transfer was forged. Not just forged, but created using a digital copy of my signature from an unrelated public document. Meeting with Alan Dawson, I spread our discoveries across his desk. His expression transformed from cautious to confident as he reviewed the materials. "This changes everything," he said, picking up the original land grant document. "We now have multiple grounds to challenge their claim. The historical designation alone should be enough to halt the eviction process immediately." For the first time in months, I felt the momentum shifting. What had begun as desperate research had unveiled not just a defense for my property, but evidence of systematic fraud. As I drove home that evening, I realized I was no longer simply fighting to save my ranch. I was potentially exposing a criminal enterprise that had victimized multiple property owners. On my kitchen table, I created a wall of evidence, documents, photographs, and Alina's preliminary investigative notes connected with red string. The random pieces had formed a clear picture of corruption and fraud. Now we needed to decide how to use this information most effectively. "We have two options," Alan explained during our strategy meeting. "We can proceed quietly through legal channels, or we can go public with what we have found." Present in his office were Maria, Elena, Professor Wilson, and representatives from 3 other families who had lost property to Lakeside Valley under questionable circumstances. After careful discussion, we chose a combined approach. File legal motions immediately while preparing to go public with our evidence. Alan filed emergency motions to halt all actions against my property based on the historical designations and evidence of document forgery. Meanwhile, Elena prepared an extensive investigative article detailing the pattern of fraud across multiple properties. Our most strategic decision was to request a public hearing before the county commissioners, rather than waiting for a court date. This would force Lakeside Valley to address our allegations in a public forum rather than through procedural legal maneuvers. Word spread quickly about the upcoming hearing. For the first time, I found myself receiving supportive calls from neighbors who had previously avoided me. Several admitted they had felt pressured to support the development and were relieved someone was challenging Harrington's tactics. The night before the hearing, I received an unexpected visit from Robert Harrington himself. His black SUV pulled into my driveway just after sunset. He approached my porch alone, his confident demeanor slightly diminished. "Mr. McAllister," he began smoothly, "I thought we might have a private conversation before tomorrow's theatrics." I invited him inside, curious about his purpose. In my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence we had gathered against him, he offered yet another increased buyout, $1.2 million. "This situation has become unnecessarily complicated," he said, sliding the offer across the table. "This amount would allow you to purchase an even larger property elsewhere. No more legal battles, no more stress." I studied him carefully. "Why the sudden generosity, Mr. Harrington? Let us just say I prefer resolving matters privately rather than through public spectacle. And the other families whose properties you acquired, would they receive similar offers?" His expression hardened slightly. "My business with other parties is not relevant to our discussion." I pushed the offer back toward him. "I think it is all connected, and I think you know that we know about the forgeries, the manipulated records, and your previous operations in other states." For just a moment, his composed facade cracked, revealing a flash of anger before he regained control. "Allegations are easy to make, Mr. McAllister. Proving them is another matter entirely." "I guess we will find out tomorrow," I replied, standing. To indicate our conversation was finished, the county commission meeting room was filled beyond capacity the following afternoon. Television cameras lined the back wall. Elena had ensured media coverage extended beyond local outlets to include regional stations. Robert Harrington and 4 attorneys occupied one table at the front. Our group sat at another. The hearing began, with the commission chairman explaining the purpose: to address concerns about potential irregularities in property transfers related to the Lakeside Valley development. Alan presented our case first, methodically outlining the evidence of document forgery, the historical protections, and the pattern of questionable acquisitions. Professor Wilson testified about the historical significance of the properties in question. Maria presented archive records showing the consistent pattern of manipulation. 3 former property owners described pressure tactics in documents they had never signed. Throughout these presentations, I watched the commissioners' expressions shift from polite attention to genuine concern. When Alina testified about Harrington's previous operations in other states, several commissioners began taking extensive notes. When Harrington's team presented their defense, their previously unshakable confidence had visibly diminished. They focused on technical arguments about proper filing procedures and dismissed the forgery allegations as unproven claims. Their presentation seemed hollow compared to our substantial evidence. During the public comment period, I was stunned by the number of community members who stood to speak in support of our cause. People I had never met expressed concern about the development's tactics. Former supporters of the project questioned whether they had been misled. The most dramatic moment came when Tom Wilson, my neighbor who had sold his property to Lakeside, approached the microphone. "I sold my farm believing James McAllister had already agreed to sell his ranch," he stated clearly. "Mr. Harrington personally showed me signed documents indicating this. If those signatures were forged, then I was deceived into selling under false pretenses." Outside after the hearing, news cameras surrounded us as Allen summarized the commissioner's decision to suspend all Lakeside Valley development activities pending a full investigation. The county attorney had announced that evidence would be forwarded to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges. As I stood answering reporters' questions, I noticed other community members approaching. People who had previously avoided me. Some offered apologies. Others expressed support. A sense of community solidarity was forming around the shared recognition that something valuable had nearly been lost. Robert Harrington exited the building surrounded by attorneys, refusing to answer questions as they hurried to waiting vehicles. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd. His contained cold fury. Mine held the steady resolve that had carried me through months of fighting against overwhelming odds. The tide had turned. We were no longer isolated voices battling a powerful corporation. We had become a community defending its history and integrity against exploitation. The county courthouse was built in 1895, its stone facade and columns projecting permanence and authority. 6 months after the commissioner hearing, I climbed those steps to attend the final resolution of our case against Lakeside Valley Estates. The investigation had expanded far beyond my property. The district attorney had uncovered evidence of systematic fraud involving multiple properties, forged signatures, falsified surveys, and bribery of former county officials. Criminal charges had been filed against Robert Harrington and 3 associates. Our civil case was heard first. The courtroom was filled with community members, media representatives, and the families who had joined our legal challenge. Judge Eleanor Martinez had a reputation for thorough preparation and no-nonsense proceedings. Allen presented our case with confidence, submitting the historical land grant documents, the indigenous treaty protections, and expert testimony confirming the forged signatures. The atmosphere in the courtroom was solemn as Judge Martinez examined the original land grant with its special historical designation. "This document alone should have prevented any transfer without federal review," she noted, looking directly at Lakeside Valley's attorneys. "The failure to disclose this designation during filing represents a serious breach of procedure." When Robert Harrington took the stand, his formerly imposing presence seemed diminished. Under cross-examination by Allen, his careful answers began to contradict documented evidence. When confronted with the expert analysis of the forged signatures, his composed facade finally crumbled. "These properties were critical to the development's viability," he admitted after particularly intense questioning. "The historical designations would have prevented the waterfront access essential to our premium pricing model." After 3 days of testimony, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling. All property transfers involving Lakeside Valley Estates were invalidated due to fraudulent practices. Properties would be returned to their original owners where possible, with financial compensation required where properties had already been developed. For my ranch specifically, she ordered permanent historical protection status to be recorded, with the deed, preventing any future development attempts without extensive federal and state review. The McAllister Ranch represents an important historical and cultural resource for this community, Judge Martinez stated in her ruling. Its preservation serves the public interest and upholds the original intent of the 1903 land grant protections. As we left the courthouse, former neighbors approached to offer congratulations and, in many cases, apologies for not supporting our fight earlier. Tom Wilson embraced me on the courthouse steps. "I should have stood with you from the beginning," he said. "Some things are worth more than money." In the months that followed, our community underwent a remarkable transformation. The Historical Society, with Maria Connors leading the effort, established a formal preservation committee to identify and protect other historically significant properties. Elena's reporting earned regional journalism awards and led to improved oversight of development practices throughout the state. Most significantly, many neighbors who had sold their properties successfully reclaimed them through the court's remediation process. While some development had already occurred, large portions of the originally planned Lakeside Valley estates were returned to agricultural and historical use. 1 year after the initial threat to my ranch, we held a Heritage Day celebration on the property. Hundreds of community members toured the historic barns and homestead. Children from local schools participated in educational programs about regional history and sustainable agriculture. The event concluded with the unveiling of an official historical marker at the ranch entrance, ensuring its significance would be recognized by future generations. As the sun set on that day of celebration, I stood on my porch watching families walk the same paths my ancestors had traveled. The fight had nearly cost me everything, but it had ultimately strengthened my connection not just to the land, but to the community itself. The ranch was more than preserved buildings and acreage. It had become a symbol of the importance of remembering our shared history and standing against those who would erase it for profit. In defending my family legacy, I had helped protect something that belonged to all of us. A living connection to our collective past and a reminder that some things truly are worth fighting for, no matter the odds.